4:17 a.m. Homer Spit, Alaska. July 3, 2026. A Coast Guard entry team pressed through the corrugated steel door of a cold storage annex at the far end of the Spit's commercial dock row. The outer room, fish totes, stacked netting, a rusted pallet jack. Then the team leader pressed a flashlight beam against the back wall, and the wall pressed back. Foam board. A false panel. Behind it, a second door, padlocked from the outside. They cut the lock in 41 seconds. Inside that inner room in the pre-dawn pink of an Alaskan summer morning were 12 young women, ages 22 to 27. All reported missing. All from towns across the Pacific Northwest. All looking at the flashlight beams as though they were not entirely certain the lights were real. 12 women. One locked room. And the entire operation had been triggered by a single ICE order that cost $187. The case would span 4 federal agencies, 2 states, and 62 days of captivity in the longest individual count. It would produce 4 arrests in Bellingham, Washington, within 6 hours of the breach. It would bring 10 of the 12 women home before the first 4th of July fireworks lit the sky over the continental United States that evening. But before any of that, there was Curtis Wynn, a 34-year-old harbor deckhand, standing on a fuel dock, 2 berths down from a building he had never had any reason to think about. Watching an ice plant delivery truck pull up for the 4th time in 1 week, and thinking, that doesn't add up. The annex on Homer Spit had been leased since October of 2025 by a Seattle-based charter operation called Meridian Outfitters, LLC. The lease was standard. The paperwork was filed. The stated purpose was storage of gear for the summer halibut charter season. Rods, tackle, inflatable tender equipment. The kind of thing seasonal operators leave on the Kenai Peninsula year-round rather than haul back to Puget Sound each fall. Nobody looked at it twice. The doors stayed padlocked from October through late spring. Other tenants had similar setups. The harbor master's office saw the LLC's name on file, saw the annual lease payment come in on time, and moved on. That was exactly what the people running Meridian Outfitters had counted on. The building itself was 6,800 square feet of corrugated steel, the kind that sits on any working waterfront without drawing a second glance. From the outside, bolted doors, a rack of orange buoys, a faded painted sign that had been there since the 90s, advertising a fish processor that no longer existed. The annex blended into the dock row the way rust blends into iron. What no one on the outside knew was what had been installed inside in the second week of November 2025. A layer of foam board insulation on the interior rear wall. A secondary steel door frame behind it, bolted through the concrete floor slab. A false freezer panel facade covering the frame. A ventilation bypass routed through the building's existing HVAC stack. The inner room, approximately 800 square feet. Insulated. Temperature controlled. And invisible from every exterior angle. One detail stuck in the case file. The construction materials for that interior modification were sourced from 3 separate hardware suppliers across the Kenai Peninsula and Matsu Valley, paid in cash, picked up in unmarked loads over a 2-week period. Whoever designed that false wall understood, specifically, how to avoid leaving a supplier receipt that crossed a reporting threshold. That level of planning did not come from amateurs. The operation that used Meridian Outfitters as its Alaska terminus had a recruitment face. It ran under a separate identity, an Instagram account called KenaiPremierHospitality, active since August of 2025. The account's profile photo was a stock image of a luxury wilderness lodge at golden hour. Its bio described premier seasonal hospitality staffing, with openings for lodge attendants, concierge staff, and activity coordinators throughout the Kenai Peninsula. The postings were detailed, Competitive wages, $34 per hour, cited explicitly. Housing provided. Transportation from Seattle or Portland arranged at no cost to the applicant. A season running May through September. The account had 214 followers when investigators eventually pulled its data. Most were young women who had submitted inquiry forms through a linked email address. The account had been in contact with at least 47 individuals between September of 2025 and June of 2026. Of those 47, 12 had accepted what was described in the messages as a preseason orientation placement, a period of introductory training before the lodge season officially opened. None of them had arrived at a lodge. The women were moved north by fishing tender in staggered groups. The operation ran them in groups of 2, 3, sometimes 4, over a period spanning April through early June. The tenders ran standard commercial routes up the Inside Passage and across the Gulf of Alaska. The women had been told they were being transported to the orientation site before the lodge opened, that the road was inaccessible that early in the season. The dental hygienist from Spokane, 24 years old, was reported missing by her sister on April 9th. The barista from Coeur d'Alene, 23, was reported on April 21st. The veterinary technician from Salem, Oregon, 26, simply stopped returning calls to her clinic in early May. Her supervisor filed a missing persons report on May 7th after she failed to appear for a third scheduled shift. The bride-to-be from Tacoma was 27. Her name was listed on the missing persons alert her parents had posted to every Facebook group covering Pierce, King, and Kitsap counties. A group photo from her engagement party ran alongside the post. Her fiancé, her parents at a backyard table in late April sunshine. By the time that photo was circulating across 3 states' worth of community boards, she had been inside the inner room on Homer Spit for 16 days. The longest captivity count in the case, 62 days. The shortest, 19 days. Here's what the surface doesn't explain, but makes sense in hindsight. The building had refrigeration infrastructure, not functioning cold storage refrigeration, but the shells of it, the compressor housing, the duct runs, the insulated paneling on the outer room's walls. Pacific Meridian Outfitters had leased what was technically designated as a cold storage auxiliary structure, which meant that an ice plant service truck pulling up to the address was, in isolation, unremarkable. In isolation. The problem was the frequency and the volume. 400 pounds of flake ice does not serve a gear storage operation. 400 pounds of flake ice, ordered 4 times in 1 week, in the first week of July when the annex was still technically pre-season, serves a refrigeration need. A live one. One that requires sustained cooling for something that generates heat. An occupied room generates heat. Curtis Wynn had been working the Homer Spit fuel dock since 2022. He knew the rhythm of the dock row the way anyone knows the rhythms of a place they show up to every morning. Who took deliveries when? What trucks belonged? Which buildings were live and which were dormant? Off-season storage sheds did not order flake ice. Not once. Not 4 times in a week. He noted the truck's arrival on the morning of July 2nd at approximately 6:45 a.m. He noted that this was the 4th time that week he had seen the same truck from the same supplier pull up to the same address. He fueled the longliner he was working. He thought about it. Then he walked to the harbor master's office and described what he had seen. I didn't know what it was, he would later say in a statement included in the federal case record. I just knew it wasn't right. The harbor master, who had the Pacific Meridian Outfitters lease on file, pulled the record. Cross-referenced the lessee name. Found nothing immediately alarming in the lease documentation itself. Then she ran the LLC's registered agent name through a standard business database. The registered agent for Pacific Meridian Outfitters, LLC, was a man named Dale Forsyth, operating out of a Bellingham, Washington address. That name did not return a criminal record, but it did return something else. A note in the Alaska State Troopers Interagency Liaison Database flagging a Bellingham-based entity associated with Forsyth as a person of interest in a separate Homeland Security Investigations inquiry. The HSI inquiry had been opened in February of 2026. It concerned a network of fake seasonal employment recruiters operating through social media, targeting young women in the Pacific Northwest with fraudulent hospitality and outdoor recreation job postings. HSI's Bellingham field contact had flagged a recruitment front operating out of a commercial mail receiving address in the city's Squalicum Harbor district. The entity's Instagram handle, KenaiPremierHospitality. The name had already been logged on an HSI watch list. Pacific Meridian Outfitters had not appeared on that list. Not yet. The Bellingham inquiry had not yet traced the operational terminus to Homer Spit. Curtis Wynn's ice order tip made that connection. The harbor master called the Alaska State Troopers dispatch at 8:22 a.m. on July 2nd. The trooper's duty sergeant reviewed the information and, within 90 minutes, was on a call with the FBI's Anchorage field office. By noon on July 2nd, a joint operational planning session was underway, involving FBI Anchorage, HSI Seattle Field Division, and the 17th District of the United States Coast Guard. The central question: the ice deliveries confirmed a sustained thermal load inside the annex. That meant the inner room was occupied. The question was by whom, in what condition, and how many. Nobody wanted to breach a building that might contain armed individuals if there was no one to rescue inside. And nobody wanted to wait another 24 hours if there were people in that room who had already been there for weeks. The team had a 12-hour window between the confirmed intelligence and the planned breach. 12 hours in which the delivery truck driver, the LLC's operators, or anyone watching the dock could notice unusual activity and trigger a warning to the people running the annex. The solution they chose: no visible staging at Homer Spit at all. The FBI Anchorage supervisory agent coordinating the operation authorized a plainclothes maritime surveillance team to observe the annex from the water, running under commercial vessel cover. Coast Guard assets were positioned at the mouth of Kachemak Bay. Standard patrol posture, nothing anomalous. The entry team itself would stage at the Homer Airport, 11 miles from the Spit, and move in after 3 a.m., when the dock row would be empty of civilian foot traffic. There was one complication. The operational planner had pulled building permits and the original cold storage facility schematics from the Homer City Records Office. The schematics showed the annex's floor plan as a single open space with a secondary utility corridor along the north wall. What they did not show, because it had been built without any permit application, was the false rear wall and the inner room behind it. The entry team would have no reliable floor plan for the space they were breaching. They knew an inner room existed because the thermal signature confirmed an occupied space. They did not know its dimensions, its exit points, or how many people were inside it. 20 minutes before the planned entry, the team leader, an FBI Anchorage special agent with 11 years of tactical field experience, made a decision. He added a Coast Guard medic unit, 2 personnel from the cutter Naushon, which had repositioned into Homer Harbor under routine patrol cover at midnight. If there were people in that room, he wanted medical support inside the building within 60 seconds of the breach. The inner room door opened at 4:17 a.m. What's most surprising about the rescue isn't the scale of what agents found, it's what didn't happen when they found it. No resistance. No armed presence inside the annex at all. The operation's logistics had been managed remotely, through the ice delivery service, through food and supply drops coordinated with the tender crews. The building stayed locked from the outside, which meant whoever ran this network had calculated that the locks and the location were sufficient. They had not calculated for Curtis Wynn. The two Coast Guard medics from the Naushon moved through the inner room door within 60 seconds of the breach, exactly as the team leader had ordered. Each of the 12 women received a preliminary medical evaluation on site. All 12 were transported to South Peninsula Hospital in Homer. The hospital had been notified at 3:50 a.m. under a pre-coordinated alert and had cleared its emergency wing. The women had been in that room in staggered overlapping groups for between 19 and 62 days. Medical staff documented their conditions in clinical language that appears in the case record. The court would later reference the documentation at sentencing. What was documented does not need to be described here. The clinical record exists. The judges read it. What can be said? As each woman was brought out through the annex's outer door, wrapped in wool blankets by the Naushon's crew, the sky above Kachemak Bay was already pink. Alaska in early July. First light before 5 a.m. The dock row was empty and quiet. The water was flat. Whatever each of those 12 women saw when they came through that door and looked up at the sky belongs to them. This case shows us how these networks operate. The most effective concealment is not the false wall. It is the legitimate paperwork surrounding it. Pacific Meridian Outfitters had a real lease, filed with a real municipal authority, paid on time, with a plausible stated purpose. The recruitment front had a real social media presence with a real follower base. The tender operators had real commercial fishing licenses. Every layer of legitimate infrastructure around this operation was real, which made the criminal layer inside it nearly invisible. The one thing the network could not hide was physics. An occupied room generates heat. Heat requires cooling. Cooling requires ice. 400 pounds, 4 times in 1 week. $187 in total ice expenditure. That is what brought the whole structure down. The arrests in Bellingham came in 2 waves. FBI Seattle field agents and HSI had been positioned in Bellingham since the evening of July 2nd, operating in coordination with the Homer Spit planning team. The arrest timing was deliberately synchronized. No action in Bellingham until the Homer breach was confirmed complete and the women were secured. An arrest in Washington before the Alaska entry could have triggered a warning that prompted the annex to be cleared. At 4:41 a.m. Pacific Time, 24 minutes after the inner room door was opened in Homer, the FBI Seattle resident agency supervisor authorized simultaneous arrest operations at 3 Bellingham locations. Dale Forsyth, the registered agent for Pacific Meridian Outfitters, LLC, was taken into custody at his residence in Bellingham's York neighborhood at 4:53 a.m. A second individual, identified in court documents as Marcus Elway, 41, was arrested at a commercial warehouse address in the Squalicum Harbor District, the same address associated with the KenaiPremierHospitality recruitment operation. A third arrest was made at a residential address in the Whatcom Falls neighborhood. The fourth arrest required an additional 3 hours. A man identified in federal charging documents as Vincent Karras, 48, was not at any of the 3 initially targeted locations. His vehicle was located by license plate readers at 5:18 a.m. on the Mount Baker Highway, heading east. Washington State Patrol units intercepted him at 6:22 a.m. near the Glacier Township area. He had a phone, $7,400 in cash, and a prepaid debit card in a name that did not match his identification. He had not yet crossed the Cascades. Karras was the operational coordinator according to the indictment. He had managed the recruitment front's communications, coordinated the tender transport schedule, and maintained the supply logistics for the Homer Annex. He had never been physically present in Alaska. His entire role had been remote, managed through encrypted messaging applications and prepaid phones replaced on a rotating schedule approximately every 3 weeks. The federal indictment, filed in the District of Alaska on July 3rd, listed 4 defendants. The charges included conspiracy, transportation in furtherance of a criminal enterprise, unlawful restraint, and additional counts that drew on federal statutes governing the movement of persons across state lines for purposes of exploitation. Maximum exposure under the primary counts: decades, not years. The network's operational structure was significantly more sophisticated than the 4 individuals charged could have designed or financed on their own. The false wall construction required prior knowledge of cold storage building architecture. The recruiting front's social media operation was professionally executed. Consistent posting cadence, curated visual content, scripted response templates for inquiry messages. The tender logistics required established relationships with commercial fishing operators across multiple Alaska ports. The 4 defendants in custody represented the operational layer. Whether the structural layer, the financing, the design, the established port contacts, has been fully mapped by investigators is a question the indictment does not answer. The case file, as publicly available, identifies no co-conspirators beyond the 4 arrested. That gap is not an oversight. It is an open investigation. By the time the federal charging documents were filed, the focus at South Peninsula Hospital had shifted from intake to notification. The FBI's Victim Services Coordinators, working in Homer, had begun the process of contacting the families of all 12 women, a process that required, in several cases, reaching people who had been living with a missing persons designation for weeks. Consider what that phone call is. You have been carrying a photo of your daughter, your sister, your fiancé through every community Facebook group in 3 states. You have called the tip line every few days. You have started to measure time in weeks since the last confirmed sighting. And then a federal agent calls you from a hospital in Alaska at 6 a.m. and tells you she is alive. The FBI's Victim Family Notification Protocol covers what happens in that phone call. It does not cover what the family does after they hang up. The bride-to-be from Tacoma, her name is not used in this account, consistent with federal victim privacy protocols, was medically cleared for transport on the morning of July 3rd. FBI Victim Services coordinated her flight with a Bureau transport aircraft repositioning from Anchorage. Her parents had been reached at 5:48 a.m. Pacific time. They were told she was alive, she was receiving care, and she would be home that day. Her flight landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at 7:14 p.m. Pacific time. Bureau Transport delivered her to her parents' driveway in Tacoma at 9:41 p.m. 13 minutes before the municipal fireworks show over Commencement Bay. 10 of the 12 women were on FBI transport aircraft or commercial bureau-coordinated flights by 6 p.m. Alaska time on July 3rd. 2 required an additional 24 hours of medical observation before being cleared for transport. Both were home by the evening of July 4th. The logistical coordination to move 10 individuals across multiple states in a single operational day, managing medical clearances, aircraft availability, family notifications, reunion protocols, involved victim services personnel from FBI Anchorage, FBI Seattle, FBI Portland, FBI Spokane, and the HSI Regional Support Office. 31 separate coordination calls were logged between 4 a.m. and 8 p.m. Alaska time on July 3rd. The operation that broke the case cost $187 in ice. The federal investigation's parallel track, the financial and structural inquiry running behind the rescue operation, was still in early stages as of the July 3rd filing date. Investigators had seized servers, phones, and financial records from the Bellingham arrest locations. A commercial fishing tender, identified as a primary transport vessel in the indictment's facts section, had been detained by the Coast Guard in Kodiak for evidentiary inspection. The records of Pacific Meridian Outfitters LLC were under subpoena. Would you have noticed what Curtis Wynn noticed? 4 deliveries from the same truck to the same padlocked building in 7 days. Off-season. Wrong volume. Wrong frequency. It sounds obvious in retrospect. In the context of a working fuel dock at 6:45 in the morning, with a longliner to service and a day's work ahead, it's the kind of thing that would be easy to let pass without comment. He didn't let it pass. The harbor master who took his report and ran the lessee name check. The Alaska State Troopers duty sergeant who recognized the interagency flag. The HSI analyst whose February watch list entry had already logged the KenaiPremierHospitality name. The FBI Anchorage supervisory agent who authorized a full joint operation based on a morning's worth of linked intelligence and a pattern in ICE delivery records. Each connection in that chain was made by a person choosing to follow one more step when stopping would have been easier. The case record notes that the Kenai Premier Hospitality Instagram account was still active as of the morning of July 2nd, posting content, responding to inquiry messages, operating as though nothing had changed. It was taken offline by court order at 11:17 a.m. Pacific Time on July 2nd. At the time of its removal, it had 12 active conversations in its message inbox with young women in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho who had submitted interest forms within the previous 30 days. 12 conversations. 12 potential next victims. Stopped because a fuel dock worker counted ICE deliveries. One detail from the case file that stays with you. The outer annex door on Homer Spit, the padlocked corrugated steel one visible from the dock row, had a company placard mounted beside it. Pacific Meridian Outfitters. A small laminated card in a standard placard holder, the kind used by every commercial tenant on every working waterfront in Alaska. It was still there when the entry team arrived. It was photographed as evidence at 4:22 a.m. The company did not exist in any operational sense. It was a label on a door. That label had been sufficient to make the building invisible for months. One thread, one placard, one ICE delivery that didn't fit. The 4 defendants were arraigned in federal court in Anchorage on July 7th. All 4 entered not guilty pleas. Detention hearings were held the same day. All 4 were remanded without bail, the court citing the demonstrated financial resources to flee, the cross-state operational scope, and the absence of fixed local ties. Forsyth's defense counsel requested a 60-day discovery period, citing the volume of digital evidence seized across 3 locations. The court granted 45 days. Karras's counsel raised a suppression argument concerning the license plate reader intercept that located his vehicle on the Mount Baker Highway on the morning of the arrest. The motion was filed and is pending resolution as of the current date. 3 things remain unresolved in the public record. The tender operators, the commercial fishing vessel crews who transported the women north on what the indictment describes as multiple separate voyages between April and June of 2026, have not been charged as of the current date. The indictment names them as unindicted co-conspirators, which indicates the investigation is ongoing and charge decisions have not been made. Whether any of the tender operators cooperated in exchange for consideration is not stated in any public filing. The financing source for the operation has not been publicly attributed. The annex lease, the construction materials for the false wall, the tender transport costs, and the recruitment front's operating expenses represent a capital investment that the 4 charged defendants' known financial profiles do not, on their face, explain. Investigators seized financial records. Where those records point has not been disclosed. And 1 woman among the 12, the case file does not specify which, was recovered carrying identification that investigators were not immediately able to verify against the missing persons database entries. Her identity was confirmed through additional documentation within 48 hours of the rescue. But the fact that her entry into the operations pipeline did not generate a matching missing persons report in any of the databases searched raises a question about whether the recruitment front's reach extended beyond the 47 identified contacts. That question has not been answered in any public filing. Drop a comment if you followed the investigation into fake seasonal employment recruitment fronts in the Pacific Northwest. There's more to this story than what made the indictment, and we read every comment. The KenaiPremierHospitality account had posted 41 times between August 2025 and July 2026. The posts averaged 214 engagements each. They looked like every other aspirational outdoor lifestyle hospitality account in the Instagram ecosystem. Clean photography, promising wages, a life that seemed just within reach if you filled out the form. 47 women had filled out the form. 12 had accepted a pre-season orientation placement. The account is gone now. The placard beside the annex door has been removed. The building on Homer Spit has been sealed pending disposition of the investigation. On the dock row, 2 berths down, the fuel dock where Curtis Wynn runs his lines is operating on its standard summer schedule. He has been interviewed by federal agents 4 times since July 2nd. He has also been interviewed by a reporter from the Anchorage Daily News. In both contexts, according to accounts in the case file and the published article, he described his observation the same way. Ice trucks don't go to storage sheds 4 times in a week. I just thought about it. That thought, followed through, cost $187 in ice to trigger. It produced 12 arrests worth of federal operational resources within 15 hours. It brought 12 women out of that inner room before sunrise. The network that used Homer Spit as its Alaska terminus is dismantled. The financial architecture behind it, and the question of whether other termini existed or exist elsewhere, remains under investigation with no public resolution date. The demand that created it is not dismantled. The recruitment infrastructure, the Instagram aesthetic, the wage promise, the seasonal staffing cover story, is a model that requires nothing more than a phone, a stock photo, and a list of young women looking for work. The KenaiPremierHospitality account took weeks to build and a court order to remove. Building the next one would take less. The fireworks over Commencement Bay that night went up at 9:54 p.m. Pacific time. The bride-to-be from Tacoma had been in her parents' driveway for 13 minutes by then. What her fiancé said when he saw her, what her parents did, what the first hour in that driveway looked like, none of that is in the federal case record. It doesn't belong there. It belongs to them. What is in the record? A notation by the FBI Victim Services Coordinator who facilitated the transport, logged at 9:43 p.m. Pacific. It reads in its entirety: subject delivered, family present, reunification complete. 4 words of outcome after 62 days. The inner room on Homer Spit is still there, behind the false wall, behind the foam board, behind the corrugated steel. It has been photographed, measured, and documented. It will be entered into evidence. Eventually, it will be demolished. Until then, it sits at the end of the dock row, padlocked, waiting for a process that moves slower than the crime that required it. The ice plant that made the deliveries is still operating. The driver who made the 4 runs to the annex was interviewed by FBI agents on the afternoon of July 2nd. He was not charged. He told agents he had received a standing delivery order through a commercial account, paid in advance, and had no knowledge of the building's interior or its occupants. His account was consistent with the operational method. The network used contractors who did not know they were contractors for anything other than a commercial order. $187. 4 deliveries. 1 man paying attention on a fuel dock at 6:45 in the morning. That is the full accounting of what broke this case open. Everything else, the agencies, The assets, the arrests, the transport flights, the medical teams, the court filings, everything else was downstream of that single observation. The investigation continues. The trial date has not been set.